A racist woman calls the police on a black teen for doing nothing wrong, but when his powerful mom shows up, everything changes. What happens next will leave you speechless. The small coffee shop was bustling with the quiet hum of chatter, the clink of coffee mugs, and the rich aroma of freshly brewed espresso. It was the kind of place where people came to unwind, catch up with friends, or just enjoy a warm drink on a chilly afternoon. The sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a gentle glow on the wooden floors and mismatched chairs. A middle-aged woman sat at one of the corner tables, her arms crossed as she stared out the window. Her name was Karen, and her gaze flickered over the patrons in the cafe with a quiet, critical eye. She was the type who prided herself on knowing who belonged and who didn't. Anyone who seemed out of place or looked different automatically caught her attention in the worst way. Her unease was palpable as she watched a young black teen walk into the cafe. The boy, no older than 16, was dressed casually, jeans, a hoodie, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. He had a friendly smile on his face, greeting the barista with a polite nod before he walked to the counter to order. He didn't look like he was causing trouble. In fact, he was just another teenager trying to enjoy a cup of coffee. But to Karen, something about him didn't fit. His presence stirred an uncomfortable feeling in her, and she couldn't help but stare. She shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing, as she watched him walk to an empty table. The boy was quiet, content, and seemed to be in his own world, but to Karen he was a threat. She didn't know why, but she was sure he didn't belong here, and her discomfort was only growing with every passing moment. Karen couldn't shake the feeling that the teen didn't belong in the coffee shop, even though he was doing nothing to warrant her suspicion. He was simply sitting there, scrolling through his phone, sipping his drink. But that wasn't good enough for Karen. She couldn't stop herself from muttering under her breath as she watched him. Loud enough for him to hear. "You're way too young to be in a place like this," she sneered, glancing over at him. "This isn't some hangout spot for kids. Don't you have somewhere else to be?" The teen looked up briefly, catching her gaze, but said nothing. He simply returned to his phone, unfazed. Karen's words had no effect on him, which only seemed to frustrate her more. She crossed her arms, watching him closely, her eyes scanning him like he was a problem that needed fixing. After a few moments of silence, Karen leaned forward, her voice rising slightly. "You're just sitting there, doing nothing. People like you don't come in here. This place is for working people, not whatever you are." The teen's brow furrowed for a moment, but he remained calm. He wasn't about to engage with her. Instead, he stared straight ahead, ignoring her venomous gaze. Frustrated by his lack of response, Karen finally decided to take matters into her own hands. She pulled out her phone, dialing 911 with an air of superiority. "Yes, I need the police," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "There's a young man here acting suspiciously. He's loitering and looks like he doesn't belong." The teen glanced up again, still unbothered, but now there was a sense of unease in the air. Karen was not backing down. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as the police arrived at the coffee shop. 2 officers stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of trouble. The woman, Karen, immediately waved them over, her expression one of forced urgency. The teen, still seated at his table, watched them approach with a quiet sense of discomfort. He stood up, greeting them politely as he sensed the tension in the air. One of the officers, a tall man with a calm demeanor, glanced between Karen and the teen. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" he asked, his voice even, trying to make sense of the situation. Karen jumped in immediately, pointing an accusing finger at the teen. "This young man is loitering. He's been sitting here for far too long, making everyone uncomfortable. I've never seen him before. He doesn't belong here. I want him removed." Her tone was sharp, but there was no real evidence to back up her claims. The teen stayed calm, his voice steady as he addressed the officer. "I've been here for less than half an hour. I'm just having coffee and minding my own business. I'm not bothering anyone." His voice was respectful, but there was an underlying frustration in his words. The officer nodded, but his expression shifted to one of confusion. He looked at Karen. "Ma'am, what exactly did he do that's suspicious? You said he was loitering. What's the issue with him just sitting here?" Karen hesitated, caught off guard. Well, I don't know. He just doesn't seem like he should be here, she mumbled, her confidence wavering. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, and it became clear. The situation didn't add up. The woman's accusations seemed hollow, her credibility beginning to crumble in front of them. The door to the coffee shop swung open, and a woman stepped inside, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was confident, poised, and unmistakably in charge. Her eyes immediately found her son sitting at the table, and she could see the tension in his posture, even from across the room. Her heart skipped a beat. Something wasn't right. The woman walked over, her heels clicking on the floor, and as soon as the officers saw her, they straightened, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The teen's mother, a woman with a strong, no-nonsense demeanor, approached the officers and her son, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Officer, what's going on here?" she asked, her gaze flickering to the two officers and then to Karen, who stood by, still wearing her look of indignation. The officers explained the situation briefly, though it was clear they were just as confused as the teen's mother. The woman had called the police because her son, who had done nothing wrong, was apparently loitering and making others uncomfortable. The mother's eyes flickered over to Karen, her face softening with disappointment. "So you called the police over a young man enjoying a cup of coffee? Is that really what you consider a problem?" Karen blinked, thrown off by the directness of the question. He doesn't belong here," she stammered, but the mom shook her head, her disappointment palpable. "You're racially profiling my son," the mom said, her voice steady but full of gravity. "This is beyond ridiculous." There was a long pause as Karen stood frozen, suddenly realizing she had made a dangerous mistake. The mom, now standing tall, revealed a knowing smile. "I'm a lawyer in this town," she said, her tone cool. "I've been working here for years. You've made a huge error in judgment." Karen's face drained of color as she understood the weight of her actions. She had just called the wrong person suspicious. Karen stood there, her face flushed with humiliation, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The weight of her actions, the false accusation, and the blatant racism were now clear to everyone in the room. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words caught in her throat. She had made a mistake so severe that no apology could erase it. The officers exchanged a look, the disappointment in their eyes evident. One of them stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, your actions have consequences. Falsely accusing someone of a crime is serious. And you've just wasted our time." He gestured toward the door. "If you continue to behave this way, there will be repercussions. I'd suggest you think about that before you make any more assumptions in the future." Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, as she tried to find words, but none came. She had never imagined her attempt to push someone out of her space would backfire this way. Her discomfort had led her to act out of prejudice, and now, standing before the mother of the young man she had targeted, the full scope of her mistake was undeniable. The teen, meanwhile, felt a mix of anger and relief. He had been upset by the incident, but seeing his mother handle the situation with such grace and authority made him proud. He looked up at her with admiration as she took control, her words unwavering. He knew she had his back, no matter what. As they left the coffee shop, hand in hand, the ordeal behind them, they walked away stronger than before. The bond between mother and son had only deepened through the injustice they had faced. Meanwhile, Karen stood alone, her regret settling in, realizing too late that her attempt to intimidate someone had only exposed her own flaws.